Mel Gibson's been trying to warn everyone about the elites for years, and in particular Hollywood itself.
Believe me, I did a lot of research on it, and according to all the research, it was way worse than that.
No matter how strong you are going to be affected by this place, and you'll resent it for a little while, then you have to let it go. Otherwise, you'll eat yourself alive here. And I think it takes that kind of cockroach resilience to survive in this town.
Yet, nobody listened. He was just made out to be a crazy man. But today, people are finally waking up to what he saw 20 years ago, and the message he gave us would eventually cost him his life.
You need a bat in the side of the head. If you get by a pack of it'll be your fault.
Yet, back in the 1980s, Gibson was so successful he was operating at a level where studios would greenlight whatever he wanted. In 1996, Braveheart swept the Oscars, 5 wins including Best Picture and Best Director. Gibson stood on that stage and called himself a fiscal imbecile.
And they had no problem with giving the reins to a fiscal imbecile. You know, this takes real courage.
And everyone laughed because he made them all very rich. But if you were paying attention around then, there were signs he saw Hollywood very differently than most people who'd made it to his level. In 1998, Playboy did an interview, and buried in all the usual promotional stuff about whatever film he was selling, he said something that did raise some eyebrows. He talked about a producer, but he wouldn't name him, whose entire philosophy about women on film was this.
He says, women on film, either naked or dead. Both is better.
Then he kept on going.
You know, I had a whole bunch of weird paranoid suspicions about what the hell was going on because there was a lot of stuff I couldn't understand.
Right.
And I formed a bunch of opinions about the town and about the people in it that were like, surely that couldn't be. Because a whole place can't be like, you know, Weird Town, you know, where the stranger wanders in and all the people are in the bar and they all shut up when he looks at them. And then you go away and you think, no, I was wrong. I mean, that's insane thinking. I'm paranoid. I imagined that stuff. And then you find out later on the track that you are exactly on track with a lot of this stuff.
They ask him about the social contract in Hollywood, and Gibson explains,
you can't get mad. You can't let it get you, because you have to make a deal with everyone else, and it's almost unspoken that you are going to be f***ed over at some point by people who you may have done something nice for.
He also tells a surreal story about meeting Christopher Walken on a New York rooftop, which he's obviously dramatizing, but if you don't take it at face value, it does tell you something about the almost otherworldly nature of Hollywood from the outsider's perspective.
No, he came to see me on a rooftop in New York. I said, hey, can I talk to you? And he said, sure. He floated in, sideways, through a crowd of people. He was wearing black. And it was like one of those old vampire movies where they don't walk, but they glide. And he was a dancer, you know, so he has you know, graceful. And my assistant was there, and he left because he couldn't stand it anymore. The air had turned cold.
This was when Gibson was in the spotlight 24/7, and he was already letting on about some of the industry's practices. He was trying to articulate something that had remained unspoken. His reputation was very much a lovable rogue or a loose cannon, so nobody really paid attention at the time. He was also making everyone way too rich for them to bother with what he was saying in magazine interviews. But maybe he could see it more clearly because he wasn't made in Hollywood the way most people at his level were. He wasn't some Nepo or Hollywood adjacent. His family moved from New York to Australia when he was just 12 after his dad won a workplace injury settlement. He had no connections and no industry parents carefully managing his rise. He studied acting because his sister filled out the application without telling him. Then Mad Max turned him into a global star before he even learned how the system truly functioned. Mad Max came in clutch, and it happened in the most Mel Gibson way ever. He'd been in a bar fight the day before the interview he didn't even want to go to, and his face was all bruised and swollen. He looked like the perfect post-apocalyptic tough guy, and not long after, he got the job. Mad Max absolutely smashed the box office, and he became a star. Relocating to Hollywood was just the next logical step. So the peculiar thing here is that by the time he showed up in LA for the film Lethal Weapon, he was already famous. That matters because he didn't owe anyone. He didn't have to spend years figuring out which executives to flatter or when to shut up and smile. Most people who make it to Gibson's level learned early that you treat the industry like a religion. You never forget that access requires submission. Gibson missed that entire education. But he did have some very real personal problems that began to unravel. His drinking is getting worse, his marriage is falling apart, his behavior is bordering on too eccentric, posing a risk for those around him. He also began making a name for himself as a homophobe and anti-Semite after a series of drunk conversations. And then he decides he's going to make a movie that's basically designed to detonate every relationship he has in Hollywood. I'm of course talking about The Passion of the Christ. In 2002, he was planning a film about Jesus getting tortured, initially planning to shoot it entirely in Aramaic and Latin. Dead languages that nobody can really understand. He didn't even want subtitles for it. So he starts taking meetings, Fox, Universal, Warner Bros, Disney, every major studio, 7 in total, and none are interested whatsoever. Part of it is about the commercial concern, but there's something else making studios nervous before he's even shot a single frame. The Anti-Defamation League, an American charity targeting anti-Semites, gets hold of an early script and immediately starts raising the alarm. The national director of the Anti-Defamation League said, quote, "By all appearances, Mr. Gibson has moved ahead with his plans to base his film based on the traditional passion play narrative that blames Jews for the killing of Jesus. For those who will see this film, the poisonous accusation that the Jews were responsible for the killing of Jesus will be unambiguous and clear." Gibson's already got baggage here. His father was a Holocaust denier, and when pressured he said that my dad taught me my faith and I believe what he taught me. The man never lied to me in his life. So the criticism starts building. New York Times critic Frank Rich questions whether the film could fuel anti-Semitism. Gibson's response? He tells the New Yorker, "I want to kill him. I want his intestines on a stick. I want to kill his dog." So this man is kind of losing control, and every studio is watching it build into a PR nightmare. The funding dries up rapidly after that, and he practically becomes a laughingstock. He's putting his entire reputation in Hollywood on this movie. South Park then catches the zeitgeist with The Passion of the Jew. Stan and Kenny see the film, hate it, call it a snuff film, and track down Gibson for a refund. Their version of Gibson is completely unhinged, a masochistic lunatic running around shooting guns and literally defecating on people. Gibson's response at the time was defiance. He self-finances the entire production, remortgaging property, coming up with $45 million out of his own pocket. If this bombs, he's then personally destroyed. So the film opens on Ash Wednesday 2004. Critics are split. There are massive protests outside theaters, but also massive lines of people wanting to see it. It then goes on to gross $83 million in its opening weekend, and goes on to make $612 million worldwide, the highest grossing R-rated film at the time. Gibson then personally walks away with somewhere between $400 and $475 million. So from the industry's perspective, he has now made one of the most profitable films in history, even after every major studio rejected it entirely on his own terms. On the Joe Rogan Experience, Gibson talked about how turbulent this was.
That was a crazy movie because it was a great movie, but it seemed like there was resistance to that movie.
Oh yeah, no, there was,
which I thought was very strange. There was like Hollywood resistance to that movie. Like people didn't like that you were making it. It seemed like
there was a lot of opposition to it, and I don't know. I think if you ever hit on that subject matter, you're gonna get people going, because
of course
it's big subject matter.
He even said how Hollywood was stunned by him walking around the system and scoring a massive hit without going through the usual channels.
And there was this kind of thing in the town. They said, "Did anyone just see that? Anyone just see what that guy did? Can't let that guy do that again." Because it sort of walked around the entire system.
It was a well-received podcast because Gibson, for all his woes, came across as more down-to-earth than your average massive star. Comments observed that he was holding back on topics that people wouldn't be prepared to hear about. The passion ultimately took its toll on Gibson, and 2 years later, everything fell apart. In 2006, he got pulled over drunk in Malibu, and during the arrest, he goes on this anti-Semitic rant to the deputy, which leaked. Gibson then apologized and admits he's an alcoholic, calling his behavior despicable. He pleaded no contest to misdemeanor DUI, received 3 years probation, and immediately pushed out carefully worded apologies through his publicist.
The court says the 53-year-old Gibson successfully completed terms of his 3-year probation. Gibson was arrested for driving drunk in Malibu in July of 2006, and during the arrest, the actor-director made derogatory comments about Jews and women, tried to escape, and repeatedly threatened the arresting deputy,
while also admitting to being an alcoholic for decades.
Because you're dealing with a sort of
a malady of the soul, an obsession of the mind, and a physical allergy. And some people need a big tap on the shoulder. In my case, public humiliation on a global scale seems to be what was required.
But it was all just damage limitation, and the industry's response is instant and total. To everyone who criticized his views, this DUI and his unsavory rant that accompanied it was just the smoking gun. Apocalypto, a film he directed and one of his best, was already in post-production, and its release was pushed back to avoid negative press. But after that, the upper echelons of Hollywood were closing ranks. Soon after, Ari Emanuel, one of the most powerful agents in the industry, publishes an open letter calling for everyone to boycott Gibson. Quote, "Hollywood should not do business with Mel Gibson until he demonstrates a real understanding of the harm he has caused. Being drunk doesn't make you say things you don't believe. It makes you say things you already believe. If this industry looks the other way, it sends a message that success excuses hate." And then things got worse. In July of 2010, Mel Gibson then found himself at the center of another major scandal when audio recordings surfaced from a phone call with his then partner. In the recordings, Gibson makes an explicitly racist remark suggesting that if she was assaulted, it would be somehow her fault. In the same conversation, he's also heard threatening to burn down her house while she was inside of it. And apparently there were actually some 35 minutes of deranged phone calls that leaked to the press in total.
I don't work around in tight clothes. I stay at home for most of the time.
Public and it's an embarrassment to me. You look like a bitch on heat, and if you get by a pack of it'll be your fault. Alright? Because you provoked it.
I'll report her to the people that take fucking money from the wetbacks, okay?
You need a bat in the side of the head. Alright? How about that? I'm threatening I'll put you in a rose garden, you. You understand that? Because I'm capable of it. You understand?
The fact that she recorded all of this says a lot, and as the situation escalated, he was legally barred from coming near her or their daughter under a domestic violence related restraining order. Those 6 years of major scandals shattered Mel Gibson's career. Nobody would touch him. From 2006 to 2016, Mel Gibson appeared in one film called The Edge of Darkness, a film where he plays a man who discovers that powerful institutions are conspiring to cover up crimes, and he's the lone truth seeker willing to die to expose them. Whether intentional or not, it was a perfect mirror into how Gibson saw himself. Around that time, accusations of game playing surrounding Gibson's exile from Hollywood began to surface too. When Ari Emanuel published the letter demanding that Gibson would be expelled from Hollywood, he was represented by Ed Lamato at ICM. So Emanuel was taking this principled stand while actually kneecapping a rival's agency's biggest star. In 2009, Lamato moves to William Morris, bringing Gibson with him and the agencies merge. Suddenly, Gibson is now Emanuel's client through that same veteran agent. So does Emanuel drop him on principle? No. He keeps him quietly on the books and nobody says anything about the contradiction until he was booted from the books again following the episode between him and his wife. While Gibson was slinking around the fringes of Hollywood, in 2007, Robert Downey Jr. stood up for him, and this was when things began to turn around.
I humbly ask that you join me unless you are completely without sin, in which case you picked the wrong industry, in forgiving my friend his trespasses, offering him the same clean slate you have me, and allowing him to continue his great and ongoing contribution to our collective art without shame.
Jodie Foster and Whoopi Goldberg also publicly defended him. Whoopi said that he spent many days with her kids and that he categorically wasn't racist.
But I know Mel, and I know he's not a racist.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I do. But I can't sit and say that he's a racist, having spent time with him in my house with my kids. I can't say it.
He was going through intense therapy at the time and seemed very keen to rehabilitate himself and his public image. But Robert Downey Jr.'s point hits on an extremely important point about the industry, bringing us right back to Gibson's own comments from 1998, involving the producer who wanted women either naked or dead. This is now widely suspected to refer to Harvey Weinstein, 20 years before this became public. While the wheels are coming off Gibson's career, Weinstein is operating openly. Allegations followed him for years. People like Tarantino surrounded him. There were whispers at parties, jokes about it at award shows, and shockingly acknowledged behind closed doors, and yet nothing happened. Courtney Love makes a joke about him in 2005.
Do you have any advice for a young girl moving to Hollywood?
I'll get lively with it.
Harvey Weinstein invites you to a private party in the Four Seasons downtown.
And this joke effectively blacklisted her from Hollywood. Weinstein kept working until 2017 until 80 women came forward. Rose McGowan helped expose his decades of abuse and was virtually blacklisted by Hollywood in the aftermath. But he's just one of many. Roman Polanski pleaded guilty to unlawful sex with a 13-year-old in 1977, when he then fled the country. At the 2003 Oscars, 26 years later, he wins Best Director and gets a standing ovation.
Goes to Roman Polanski for the pianist.
Woody Allen faces allegations from his adopted daughter. Court documents later show nearly 100 meetings with Jeffrey Epstein, but he's never left the big time and still regularly makes blockbusters. Filmmaker Bryan Singer faced multiple allegations and settled lawsuits, yet he kept on getting hired. Bohemian Rhapsody won 4 Oscars not long ago. The list is pretty much endless, and if anything, it gets worse the deeper you look. Victor Salva was convicted in 1988 for sexually abusing a 12-year-old. He served only 15 months. And then Hollywood kept on hiring him to direct children's movies. They kept separating art from artists when it's convenient. Dan Schneider, all these guys, which sends a very clear economic message. Employing problematic people is fine as long as they continue to serve the right ends. This isn't a game of whataboutery. Hollywood is a system where morals are relative. It's not about the severity of what you did, it's about how politically expensive it becomes to ignore it. Gibson's anti-Semitism and abuse, especially in an industry full of Jewish people, is unforgivable to many, and Robert Downey Jr.'s plea for mercy doesn't really erase that. But Hollywood didn't exile him because those things are morally worse than drugging and assaulting people, or fleeing the country after pleading guilty to raping a child. They exiled him because his scandals were loud, public, and impossible to spin. The industry is selective about who becomes the boogeyman, and that selection has nothing to do with who actually did the worst things. Gibson's redemption arc continued in 2016 when he released Hacksaw Ridge, a World War II film about a conscientious objector who saved 75 men without firing a weapon. It went on to receive 6 Oscar nominations. It was independently financed with no major studios involved, but this time, instead of punishing him, they welcomed him back. Gibson appeared on The Late Show with Stephen Colbert. He called his past a rough patch, and he said that moment shouldn't define the rest of my life. The crowd cheered, others said it wasn't enough. Slowly the roles came back, like Get the Gringo, Fat Man, Bloodfather, and Daddy's Home 2, and Gibson's appearances were generally viewed positively even if they weren't anything like the massive titles he once starred in. Then, 2023, Gibson's name gets attached to The Sound of Freedom, a film about child trafficking, starred by the same guy who played Jesus in The Passion. Gibson was serving as executive producer and recorded a promotional video warning people about child trafficking. Originally, the film was acquired by 20th Century Fox, yet it was shelved after Disney acquired Fox in 2019. It had a budget of just some $15 million, and accusations that Hollywood was trying to blacklist came flooding in when it launched, with some saying that showings at popular cinema chains were cancelled or even sabotaged. The film itself leans heavily into the idea that influential people are involved in trafficking and the problem is just being covered up internationally, something Gibson has certainly alluded to over the years.
One of the most disturbing problems in our world today is human trafficking, and particularly the trafficking of children.
Many scoffed at the notion that pedophile rings were being run by rich elites, but as Jeffrey Epstein's operation has come into the light, the flight logs, the witness testimony, connections to world leaders and billionaires, this conspiracy theory has just become a fact the establishment tried to ignore for years. Around the film's release, viral quotes started spreading about Gibson's conspiratorial view, claiming he exposed elites drinking children's blood, Andrew Combe harvesting, and satanic rituals, QAnon-type stories. Every single quote attributed to Gibson is fake. They trace only to yournewswire.com, a notorious misinformation site. Maybe it's part of yet another smear campaign designed to muddy Gibson's rehabilitation and feed tabloid headlines to keep his reputation questionable. Or maybe it's a manifestation of him becoming a symbol onto which both sides of the culture war paint their narratives. To some, he's a martyred truth teller, to others, a cautionary tale of when mental health issues and anger take hold of someone. Either way, the fake quotes spread because they sound like what people already believe about him. That was South Park's parody too. They were saying Gibson made this very public monster out of himself. In reality, the truth behind Gibson's criticism of the establishment is probably more of a case of something simpler yet no less horrifying: the banality of evil. Thousands of people making small, cowardly decisions that add up to systemic abuse. Which is far more disturbing because it implicates everyone through their daily choices in supporting and protecting the industry. Unlike blood-drinking rituals, everyone is capable given the right incentives. When asked at the Hacksaw Ridge press conference to describe Hollywood in one word, Gibson laughed. Just one word? Then he gave his answer: survival. He's right. Everyone's trying to survive, and survival means making calculations about who you can cross and who you can't. But Hollywood's evil operates on a different level altogether. It's not the deranged actions of a troubled man. It's structural, institutional, it's the sober, calculated decision to protect people for decades. So in the end, there are no heroes in this story, just different flavors of the same human capacity to harm people and justify it in the morning.